Abbey Road Studio Two. The Beatles were recording, late session, working on something new, something different, pushing beyond pop, beyond simple, beyond what anyone expected, becoming something more. John, Paul, George, Ringo, George Martin in the booth, engineers at the console, instruments everywhere, tape reels rolling, the sacred space where the Beatles stopped being performers, started being artists, started creating instead of just playing. The door opened. Nobody expected it. Nobody knew he was coming, but there he was, Bob Dylan. Guitar case in hand, that Dylan look, denim, rumpled, the embodiment of American folk, American poetry, American truth set to music. The Beatles stopped, stared, because Bob Dylan didn't just show up, didn't just drop by, didn't just visit. Bob Dylan existing in the same space as the Beatles was collision, was two universes meeting, was folk meeting rock, was poetry meeting melody, was everything music could be happening in one room. "Mind if I sit in?" Dylan asked, voice quiet, unassuming, like he was just another musician, just another person. Not Bob Dylan, not the voice of a generation, just Bob. "Please," John said, voice reverent, because John worshipped Dylan, studied Dylan, wanted to be Dylan, wanted to write words that mattered like Dylan's words mattered, wanted to be poet and musician, like Dylan was poet and musician. Dylan sat down, opened his case, took out his guitar, beat up, used, loved. The kind of guitar that's been played, really played, not for show, for survival, for saying things words can't say, for being exactly what musicians need. Truth machine, beauty maker, soul expresser. And what happened in the next hour didn't just create music, it created understanding, created respect, created the acknowledgement that different approaches, different styles, different philosophies can coexist, can learn from each other, can make each other better. But to understand why the Beatles' response shocked Dylan, you need to understand what each represented and why this meeting mattered more than anyone realized. Bob Dylan in 1966 was revolution, had gone electric, had betrayed folk purists, had stopped being what everyone needed him to be, had chosen evolution over expectation, had become poet, not folk singer, poet who used music, used guitar, used voice to say things poetry alone couldn't say. The Beatles in 1966 were transformation, had stopped touring, were focusing on studio, were pushing boundaries, were becoming experimental, were using studio as instrument, were creating sounds, textures, experiences, not just songs, art, real art. Both were being criticized, both were being called sellouts. Both were being told they betrayed what made them special. Both were being attacked for evolving, for changing, for refusing to stay what they'd been, for becoming what they needed to be. And here, in Studio Two, at 2:47 a.m., they were together. Two forces, two revolutions, two refusals to stay static, meeting, understanding, recognizing each other. Dylan played, not a famous song, not a hit, something new, something he'd been working on, something that wasn't finished, wasn't polished, wasn't ready, just honest, just real, just Dylan being Dylan. Words that cut, melody that haunted, truth that hurt, beauty that healed. The Beatles listened, not as fans, as musicians, as people who understood, who knew what Dylan was doing, what he was risking, what he was trying to say, what he was becoming. When Dylan finished, silence, complete silence. Nobody spoke, nobody moved, just sat there, processing, understanding, feeling. Then Paul did something unexpected. He stood up, walked to the piano, started playing, not Beatles music, not pop, not anything commercial, just chords, beautiful chords that supported what Dylan had played, that enhanced, that honored. John joined, on guitar, not rhythm, not rock, just texture, just sound, just addition to what Dylan had created. George added quiet notes. Ringo, soft percussion. Not drums, just touches, just presence, just being there. They played Dylan's song, his new unfinished song, together. The Beatles backing Bob Dylan, making his words, his melody, his truth, bigger, fuller, more complete. Dylan was crying, openly, because this wasn't competition, wasn't comparison, wasn't who's better. This was collaboration, was respect, was acknowledgement that different doesn't mean opposed. Different means complementary. Different means both can exist, both can be valid, both can make each other better. When they finished, Dylan's voice was shaking. That was what I was hearing, in my head, what I couldn't get alone, what I needed. Thank you. Paul smiled. That's what musicians do. We hear each other. We support each other. We make each other better. Your words needed music. We gave it music, because that's what it deserved. John added, you've been pushing us for years. Your lyrics, your poetry, your refusal to be simple made us want to be better, want to write deeper, want to say more. You've been teaching us, without knowing, without trying, just by being Bob Dylan, by writing truth, by refusing to be what everyone needed, by being what you needed. You taught us that, and we're grateful. Dylan looked at them, really looked. I thought you were competition, thought you were the thing I had to fight, had to oppose, had to be different from. But you're not. You're the same. We're the same, fighting the same fight, refusing the same expectations, becoming the same thing. Artists, not just musicians. Artists, people who use music to say things, to create things, to be things. We're the same. George spoke quietly. We've learned from you, all of us, your courage, your honesty, your refusal. We wanted that. Wanted to be brave like you're brave. Wanted to be honest like you're honest. Wanted to refuse like you refuse. You showed us it was possible to evolve, to change, to become. Thank you for that. Ringo simply, you made it okay to be different, to change, to not be what we were, to become what we are. That permission, that example, that matters more than you know. They recorded together. That night, that early morning, songs nobody's heard, songs that exist only in Abbey Road archives. Not for release, not for commercial, for them, for proving, for understanding, for creating something together, for being musicians, not competitors, musicians. Dylan left at dawn, guitar case in hand, changed, understanding something he hadn't before, that the Beatles weren't enemy, weren't opposition, weren't the thing to fight. We're allies, we're fellow travelers, we're people on the same journey, just taking different paths, just using different methods, just being different while being the same. The Beatles never forgot that night, referenced it, used it, let it push them, let it validate them, let it prove that evolution was right, that changing was necessary, that becoming was the only way to survive, to matter, to be artists instead of just being famous. In 1978, Dylan was asked about the Beatles, about their influence, about what they meant to music. They showed me something. In their studio, 1966, they showed me that different styles can coexist, can support each other, can make each other better. I played them something raw, unfinished, vulnerable, and they didn't judge, didn't critique, didn't compete. They added, they supported, they made it better. That's what real musicians do. They make each other better, not through competition, through collaboration, through respect, through understanding that we're all fighting the same fight, trying to create truth, trying to say things, trying to matter. The Beatles understood that, showed me that, changed me. Paul in 1984. Dylan was God to us, was everything we wanted to be, poet, truth teller, revolutionary, and he came to our studio, played for us, trusted us, and we got to show him that we understood, that we respected, that we were trying to do the same thing he was doing, just differently. That night validated everything, proved we were on the right path, proved that evolution was right, that changing was necessary, that becoming artists instead of just being Beatles was the only way forward. John before he died. Dylan and the Beatles. Everyone thought opposition, thought competition, thought one had to be better. But we were the same, fighting the same fight, refusing the same expectations, becoming the same thing, artists. That night in the studio, playing together, that proved it, proved we were allies, proved music is big enough for both, for all, for everyone trying to create truth, trying to matter, trying to be more than just famous, trying to be important. May 1966. Bob Dylan played one song for the Beatles in their studio, and their response shocked him. Not because they criticized, not because they competed, because they collaborated, because they understood, because they showed him that different doesn't mean opposed. Different means complementary. That folk and rock, poetry and melody, Bob Dylan and the Beatles, can coexist, can support, can make each other better. But what happened that night changed more than just those 5 men, changed more than just that moment, changed how musicians saw each other, how collaboration worked, how music itself evolved. The recordings from that session exist in Abbey Road archives, locked away, never released, never heard publicly, but they exist. Proof that Dylan and the Beatles created together, that folk and rock merged, that poetry and melody unified, that competition became collaboration. George Martin, who was there that night, spoke about it once before he died. That session changed how I thought about production, about collaboration, about what's possible when you stop trying to make artists compete and start letting them support. Dylan brought poetry, the Beatles brought structure. Together they created something neither could create alone. That's what collaboration is. Not two people doing the same thing. Two people doing different things that complement, that enhance, that make each other better. The engineer that night, Jeff Emmerich, kept notes, detailed notes, about what was played, what was said, what was felt. Dylan walked in insecure, uncertain, wondering if the Beatles would judge him, would compete, would prove they were better. Instead, they loved him, supported him, made his song better than he could alone. And you could see it in his face, the realization that he wasn't alone, that the Beatles were fighting the same fight, refusing the same expectations, becoming the same thing. Artists, that realization changed him, changed them, changed what music could be. Other musicians learned about that session, not details, just that it happened. That Dylan and the Beatles had collaborated, had created together, and it gave them permission. Permission to collaborate, permission to cross genres, permission to learn from people different from them, permission to make music better by working together instead of working against. Within 5 years, collaboration became normal, expected. Folk artists working with rock musicians, jazz players with pop stars, classical with experimental, genres blending, styles merging, competition becoming collaboration. All because Dylan and the Beatles had shown it was possible, had proven it created something better, had demonstrated that different makes stronger, not weaker, stronger. Paul tried to get those recordings released, multiple times, over decades. People need to hear this, need to understand what collaboration sounds like, what happens when great artists support instead of compete. But Dylan says no, says it was private, sacred, just for us, just for proving something, not for public. And I respect that, but I wish people could hear, could understand, could know what's possible when artists choose collaboration. Dylan's response when asked about releasing those recordings that night wasn't about creating product, was about creating understanding, about proving to ourselves that we weren't enemies, weren't competition, we're allies, we're people on the same path, using different methods but going the same direction. That proof, that understanding, that's what mattered, not the recordings, the moment. And the moment can't be released, can't be sold, can only be remembered, can only be honored, can only be kept sacred. That night influenced everything that came after. Sgt. Pepper, Dylan's John Wesley Harding, the experimental work, the genre blending, the refusal to stay in boxes, to stay what they'd been, to be what everyone expected. That night gave them permission, gave them proof, gave them understanding that evolution was right, that collaboration was powerful, that different was strength. That's everything. Look, if this story moved you, if you've seen competition where collaboration belonged, if you've learned from people different from you, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand that different isn't enemy. Different is opportunity. Different is growth. We've completed 94 Beatles stories, 94 reminders that the Beatles learned, grew, evolved by listening, by respecting, by collaborating, even with people completely different, especially with people completely different. Drop a comment. Have you collaborated where you expected competition? Have you learned from people different from you? Turn those notifications on. Remember, different doesn't mean opposed. Competition isn't the only way. Collaboration creates more than fighting ever could, and respect matters more than agreement. Bob Dylan and the Beatles proved that in Studio Two, when one song became understanding and changed everything.